Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. My name is Philippine, and I'm working with community.
There's nothing as a base.
Sorry, guys. We're starting. You can use that to hear me well. Like all the yeah. Feel free to take one so you can hear everything through. I'm seeing that our speakers are already have a lot to say. It's a good news. Good news for us. So thank you. As I was saying, my name is Philippine. I'm here from Comunidad por el Clima. We are a Spanish organization working on the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And we are here today to talk about just transition towards a workers and workforce. A really important transition, more than needed. And just to open the floor to all the speakers that will be presented good cases and study cases and more. How can we implement the just transition? I wanted to share a quote from the Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, that he just said 6 days ago, and I will have to read it, sorry about that, but I don't know it. So he said, don't listen to those who say the transition is incompatible with the well-being of nation or that is bad for the middle working class. If we do not conquer sustainability, both the working and middle class will suffer the most because they work in the areas most affected by climate change in the country. Honestly, I couldn't have made a better and a simpler statement, so I will just leave it there and directly invite Olga Strzelecka Elena, team leader of skills strategy for future labor market at ILO, to share a bit about the current trends and what's going on right now with the just transition in workforce. Thank you, Olga.
Thank you very much, and thank you also for inviting the ILO and to give us an opportunity to share a little bit of our findings and experiences. So in the ILO, we have guidelines on just transition, which actually target not leaving behind anyone. So it's a human-centered, if you want, pro-social part of the climate policy. But we see this as a very integrated part. It's an integral part of the policy. If we want climate policy to make successful, we have to think about the social and economic consequences. So in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was concluded, it already mentioned just transition. And back then, the ILO worked with its constituencies, and our constituencies were the only UN organization that whose membership is not only governments. We have 187 governments, but we also have among our members employers and workers. So it's always a tripartite, sometimes quite tough negotiations, but we always manage to come to some, if not total consensus, then a compromise. So we managed also to put together guidelines on just transition, mentioning key policy areas that make the transition just and make the transition successful and help the climate policy also being successful. And these include very different policy pillars, from macroeconomic and sectoral policies, fiscal policies, active labor market policies, to social protection, because if someone loses job, we need to make sure that the person has an income generation opportunity and also opportunity to use this time to get requalified for another job. Skills development for exactly the same reason, because people have to have opportunities to reskill and upskill and move between jobs. Labor market institutions, who are very, very important to provide that support mechanisms, to advise on career guidance, to advise on training opportunities. Support to enterprises and enabling environment and enterprises, especially small and medium-sized enterprises, micro-enterprises, because they are the ones generating jobs. So if they don't get support, we're not getting jobs alone, let alone green jobs. And then, of course, social dialogue, which is key, because we cannot really achieve a policy or even implementation of a policy that would be in agreement between different parties to minimize the negative consequences of the transition. I can tell you that today, because it's a Human Development Day announced by the presidency of the COP29, it's the first one in the history of the COP, Human Development Day, which actually looks at education, training, health, and skills and jobs. Skills, jobs in the framework of just transition. So we launched today a new result of our diagnostic, looking at the transition to renewable energy and energy efficiency by 2030. So it's basically a policy scenario, policy which assumes the investments are done to keep the 1.5 centigrade target to invest in renewables and energy efficiency. So these investments may bring additional, which means in plus to the baseline scenario, additional jobs, net created jobs, 37.5. This is excellent news. We just need to continue investing in renewable policies. So this year we issued a joint report together with the RENA, the Renewable Energy, International Renewable Energy Agency. That is the agency which is monitoring the number of jobs created. So the update was 16, I think 0.5, if I remember correctly, million jobs created to now. So there is an opportunity of creating many more until 2030 if investments are there. But in order to make this happen, of course, we need to put through very important active labor market policies, retraining, reskilling, upskilling, but also reforming technical vocational education training. Why? Because when we look at this projection, it comes very clearly that most of those gaining of jobs will happen at the medium skill level. So these are builders, construction workers, these are sales workers, these are technicians, plumbers, electricians, laborers in manufacturing that need training in how to work in a green way, how to use pro-climate materials, climate-neutral materials, how to green the process while working. And for example, in the building sector, it's also very important not only which materials and where they come from, how green they are in the process that prepared those materials in the value chain, but also what happens after, for example, a building was built or retrofitted for dismantling. Is this process also green? So through the whole value chain. That requires massive investments in reskilling, upskilling, and also reforming vocational education and training, greening vocational education training. So we have this new tool, which is a practical toolkit on greening TVET, and it looks at very different aspects of technical vocational education and training, from selecting critical occupations to designing the competency standards, curricula, teacher training. Teachers are really key. They are very, very important. And then looking also at monitoring and evaluation. But it also includes some systemic elements, which are very, very important. And these are two. Coordination with other policies. So when we speak about skills development policy, it's not a self-standing policy. Our climate policy, not a self-standing policy. They have to talk to each other. And they also have to communicate with the employment policy. So all these provisions have to be made, but also the NDCs, nationally determined contributions. This is where all of this has to meet, right? So we need to have provisions for just transition and for skills development there. If we look at the results of the projection which I mentioned today, they may bring many jobs, and many jobs for youth, which are so needed around the world. But we also know that, for example, women will not be able to benefit to the same extent as men. There's a big potential job gap, gender gap in job gains, because we are basically dependent on the past trends. And in the past, women did not have enough access to technical training, STEM type of engineering training, and it's not always so easy also to attract women to go through that training. So that is something the world will have to resolve, because in order to overcome a potential and even current shortage of workers with green skills, we need really to attract many more, especially women. And one last thing which I wanted to say, it's, of course, we always need to think about kind of policy cycle, which starts from skill needs anticipation. I know that there is a lot of demand for that, to understand what skills will be needed in the future. And then we go through the implementation and we get to monitoring. And this completes the circle. But this circle cannot be completed if it's not done really in the dialogue with the world of work. Only in dialogue with the world of work and in collaboration with the world of work, we can tackle the whole challenge of the massive need to train and retrain, because governments alone will not be able to fund it. Workers alone will not be able to fund it. Employers alone will not be able to fund it. So it should be some kind of collective funding with incentives. And also we need to attract international climate funding to resolve this massive challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. It was a very good first statement. And now I will ask Robert Marinkovic, from the International Employers Organization this time, to give another views from the employer side, and maybe you will try to do some announcement like Ailo just did. But yeah, all floor yours.
Thank you. Thank you, first of all, for having me here and for the invitation. Very glad to be able to join. Yeah, I think it's a very important conversation from our side. We focus a lot on just transition, on green skills, so we're very happy to see it rising on the agenda and becoming a bigger part of the conversation at COP. I'll try to be brief because I'm also very curious to hear what the others here have to say. But IOE is a membership organization. We have members in over 140 countries, national employers organizations who represent the whole of economy usually. Traditionally, they engage in much more, employment, labor-focused matters around occupational safety and health, also business and human rights, human resources issues. So we're quite close to the kind of education, training, skills discussion. A lot of our members are not so well-versed and familiar with, green skills and climate action, but that's also part of my job to try and bring them up to speed. I mean, first of all, what we're seeing is that, there's a lot of diversity, right? A lot of variability across national contexts, and there's already, some countries, some companies who are much more ahead than others. So I think, first of all, there's a challenge there for private sector to kind of keep up and try and satisfy, try and, smooth out a little bit supply and demand. That's also what we're hearing from studies from companies like LinkedIn, that there's a growing gap between skills supply and skills demand. One thing also that I feel like we should be talking a little bit about more is this, the link between the digital and the green transitions and how they interact, because at the end of the day, a lot of digital technologies can enable green skills and the green transition, but at the other hand, they can also create new challenges, like we're seeing around with AI these days, for example. The other thing I wanted to highlight also is the devil is in the details usually, right? And when you start digging deeper a little bit, you start seeing some of these discrepancies and challenges. I came across a very interesting article recently that talked about the mismatch often that sometimes happens between the types of training that are offered and some of the promises that are made by training or kind of quick training schemes for green skills, and also what the labor market actually is looking for. So typically certified electricians are much more needed than somebody who's done like a 4-month crash course on, installing solar panels or installing electric vehicle chargers, right? So there is sometimes a need to work a bit in more detail on the actual type of training that is needed, or at least some sort of certification recognition schemes. I think in that sense, we need to work more closely with the private sector. We need to engage more and have conversations with companies to understand a bit better what is needed. But at the end of the day, it's challenging because these things can move fast, right? And sometimes it's hard to predict the future. Sometimes a new technology comes up that disrupts things. There's also in the developing emerging economies, I think that's also the kind of new frontier where, as Olga mentioned, there's a big proportion of youth that often lack any kind of quality education opportunities and skills. And I think in that context also there's still an ongoing dynamic of moving from rural to urban environments, for example. And I think there's a huge opportunity for international collaboration and support, where people move from rural contexts into urban ones. And beyond the skills question, I think the point at the end of the day has to also be about job creation. If we don't have these, supportive policy frameworks and initiatives and financing and different types of resources to create the jobs, to absorb the demand for employment from different populations and especially youth, then there can be a bit of a standstill there, right? So all of these things have to work together hand in hand. And the job creation obviously has to come primarily from the private sector, but for that to happen, we need to have a good environment in place. We need to incentivize some of these things. Another just last point, an interesting discussion I had in another event on Saturday was around stimulating green industry and how we can, different types of policies that can be used to scale up basically and accelerate the development of green industry. And this came from the Industrial Transition Accelerator. That's part of the Mission Possible partnership, if I'm not mistaken. So they were saying basically that, for a lot of green industries, there is still a price premium. If you look at, green steel compared to conventional steel or other things, usually it ends up being a little bit more expensive than the conventional one, whereas the difference in quality is not that much. So we need policies that can smooth that difference out a little bit and stimulate the demand for green products, for green industry, without which even if we train people in the necessary green skills, we might not have the adoption at scale that we need. So again, it has to be a systems approach. It has to be acting on many different elements in a dynamic way. Lots of good solutions out there already, but yeah, we just need to take it up a notch. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Now we'll ask a direct question to Jane Eisenhardt, engagement and acceleration expert both from Race to Zero and the Environmental Defense Fund. So, Jane, why do we speak about just transition and workforce transition at COP29?
Thanks, Philippine. And I think I'm going to answer that question by doing a bit of a deep dive on something that Olga opened up with for some of the scene setting and really thinking about why are NDCs so important? That's like the buzzword, well, one of two main buzzwords we're hearing at COP, NDCs, and they need to be investable NDCs. But what that actually means is they need to be implementable. Like in order to have NDCs that we can get the proper mechanisms for, we have to transform all of the economy to be able to deliver on them. So we really are in this implementation moment, and I don't want to understate how important that is at COP and how important Education Day and workforce activation is here at COP. And sitting from where I sit on the Race to Zero, which is the world's largest coalition bringing non-state actors from across business, finance, subnationals, universities, and healthcare all together to reach net zero by 2050. In order to do that, we are past the phase of mobilizing and setting sexy targets. We're in the moment of action, and that requires a complete transformation of all of these systems to meet the green skills demand. And part of that, and what I'm working with organizations like ECODES, which is one of our accelerators of Race to Zero, is really taking what's happening here at COP and turning that into information that is applicable for all of our different audiences, and kind of focusing on a business perspective specifically, because that's what we'll kind of touch on when we turn to the next speaker, it's really making that a business narrative. So we have the technical green skills piece for sure, but we also need to transform every job into a climate job. And I think we're doing a really bad job of that right now, of taking the climate narrative into something that makes sense across companies. And until we get that right, yeah, there's a bit of a fear that we're not going to be able to reach our 2030 targets. So just some of the scene setting of, I think, how it connects to the wider agenda and definitely how it connects to the race. But we have a ton of examples coming up, so I don't want to harp too much on my scene setting point. But before I pass to the other speakers for some of those, I just want to emphasize some of the work that Comunidad por el Clima has been doing to address this, and it's one of the examples of why the Race to Zero is working so well. And it's that they are taking what's happening in these spaces and applying it to a Spanish audience. And one great example has been their Hostelería por el Clima initiative this past year that noticed that bars and restaurants in that part of industry was completely out of the climate net zero transition. And so what they did is they partnered with a big company that was able to fund some of this capacity building, and they were able to get into really unique parts of sector and society to upskill them on climate, measure their carbon footprints, and then figure out what solutions were most impactful for those businesses. And they've actually, over the span of a year, reduced 30% of emissions in the bar and restaurant industry in Spain because of this. And it's all because they really translated, put it into the context, and were able to upskill the workforce. So just a shout out to you all. Yeah, and with that, there's many other examples that the others will speak to.
Thank you so much, Jane, for showcasing one of our examples. We are really proud of it. And you're right, saying that sometimes we do a very bad job. We are at COP to recognize that we need to do more. And with this being said, I will let Matthias Mühlbauer, he's the COO, and the co-founder of 1.5. And I know that you're doing a lot of work on workforce activation in a lot of sectors, including employees. So maybe can you share some insights on the current gaps? What do we do so bad, to put it simply? And what can we change? Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. I'm Matthias from 1.5. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do. We have a climate advisory side, so we're a consulting business working directly with industry. We're based in New York. We focus on the energy, industrials, CPG or consumer goods, and the finance sector as well. That's important for the second part. We also do climate training that's driven by practitioner insights. So we take a lot of the work that we're doing in industry and we translate that into content and training. Our flagship program is the 1.5 Academy. It's an 8-week cohort-based program, so bringing in not just learning, but also peers and community as well. After launching this in February last year, we've scaled this to about 800 people globally across 50 different countries. Our training in general has reached 5,000 people. We have ambition to reach 100,000 trained and activated sustainability professionals for 2030. My ambition would be a lot higher in terms of numbers, but I have some more conservative, risk-averse people in my leadership team. But with all you here ambitiously, let's definitely get to like 1 billion people upskilled by 2030. We need a revolution in skills. And I think covering what Robert had talked about, this enablement of digital, there's a really interesting connection here that I think is really optimistic and exciting, especially when we think about the just transition, local solutions, and how digital skills allows people to access the global market as well, right? On top of that, that's accessing the global knowledge market at the same time, specifically in climate and sustainability. That's fantastic. We're going through this digital revolution, and that's happening now in a climate version of that as well. So when we take a look at the clean tech revolution, for example, you can look at the Rocky Mountain Institute data, and they say that the last 20 or so years have had about $1 trillion go into the clean energy revolution. The next 4 years, we'll see another $1 trillion going into that. And when we break down some of that investment, some of it's going to go into enabling the implementation side, and this is going to come into employees and skills. And so part of this is, to what Jane had shared earlier, we've had a bit of challenge with selling this climate and sustainability story to organizations. However, we've got this maybe solution I think is important. Sorry, is that better? Yeah, sorry about that. So with our research on the climate workforce of the future, we just released a report last September, this September at New York Climate Week, and we talk about this idea of embedded sustainability. And the premise of this is, how can we take sustainability out of the sustainability team? How can we actually embed it into the organization? Why is that important? Well, these ambitious net zero strategies being set just by the sustainability team means that a lot of their work is on education and awareness building throughout the organization rather than actual strategic orchestration and direction of this strategy. What we need to do instead is embed this throughout the organization, right? Implementation needs to bring in finance, procurement, IT, right? We need the entire business model to shift in order for us to reach these transformational goals that we have. Now, how does that actually align with this skills discussion that we're having? Well, upskilling and reskilling is one of the ways that we can do this. When we think about reducing emissions within a supply chain, a person who has sustainability expertise is probably not the best person to decarbonize a supply chain. The best person to decarbonize a supply chain is a supply chain expert that has been upskilled on sustainability. They understand climate fluency, they understand what scope 1, 2, and 3 is, but they also understand the complex web of supply chain. They understand how negotiations work. They understand how to switch different suppliers readily and quickly, and also do it within a business context as well. So I'll wrap up my discussion there as an introduction, and hope to go deeper into some of those things as well. Thanks, Philippine. Back to you.
Thank you, Matthias. We know that we start the event without even having a definition of just transition, and we are seeing that right now in the negotiations, just transition is not like a common definition. So we have the chance to have an academic with us, Perla Martinez. She's coming from the Tecnológico de Monterrey in Mexico. And you are working with different sectors into fostering the transition. So how do you do it? How do you find this common definition of just transition to work with all these different sectors?
Yes, thank you very much for having me here. I'm very happy to share with you. Well, like Philippine said, I'm from Tecnológico de Monterrey, which is a Mexican private university, which we have over 25 campuses all across Mexico. And we actually, the thing that catalyzed everything for us on climate action was setting our target in Race to Zero. And after that, we set our, after setting our net zero goal, we aim to be carbon neutral by 2039. We obviously started working on decarbonization and also on adaptation, but as a university, obviously, we thought that the heart of everything had to be our climate action plan focused on a university has to be on education. So the first thing that we discovered when we started applying the climate action plan, the pillar on education, we realized that even though tech has a lot of, different degrees that have to do with sustainability, with energy, with ESG, etc., like some of you have been saying, this was like very, very focused, right? Like the students who study sustainability and the students who study climate change, they know about it, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, for instance, law students, economy students, business students knew about the basic science and facts of the climate crisis, etc. So the first action that we engaged on was actually, like Olga was saying, teachers are super important. So we realized that not necessarily even the teachers had the basic knowledge on that regard. You could ask a lawyer what what greenhouse gas emissions were, and they wouldn't necessarily know exactly what that was. So we started a really ambitious education program for teachers, first and foremost. Like the most basic, you need to have your teachers. For instance, I mean, I think I can say that we even realized that we had some teachers that didn't necessarily believed in that climate change was a phenomenon caused by emissions, caused by human activity, right? So we have now we have deployed this program, and all of the teachers across TEC have taken this basic course regarding climate science. And then we will go to the fact that, like you were saying, what is just transition? Because not necessarily all the teachers, for instance, in the specific careers regarding energy and that, could see the holistic approach of that, not necessarily thinking about that a just transition means taking into account the social, the human aspect, the vulnerability aspect, and that. So also, even though we could have teachers who were very knowledgeable on climate science or in the technicality things about decarbonization, I'm sorry, descarbonización. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were taking these social aspects into account. So we got teachers from different schools talking to each other, like the engineering teachers talking to the teachers in the human and philosophy and the social studies to know about that comprehensive aspect of a just transition. And perhaps I can share with you that, yeah, I mean, we have now included basic skills and knowledge regarding climate change in all through the academic programs. So you have lawyers, economists, business students, engineers know about this, not only like sustainability engineers. But the fact is that we do have some pending work to do regarding where our students choose to work after they graduate. For instance, now, mainly most of our graduates, I mean the majority of our graduates, actually we know that they don't necessarily go to the companies that are pushing for decarbonization or for aiming to achieve the 1.5 goals in the Paris Agreement. We have a lot of students that still go to heavy polluting and heavy emitter industries. For instance, in my city, I mean the city where TEC has its main campus, which is which is Monterrey in the northeastern part of Mexico, is the most industrialized city in Mexico. So a lot of students go to steel companies, to cement companies, to a refinery of Petróleos Mexicanos, which is based in the metropolitan area of the city. And we know what some universities have been doing on that regard. For instance, also pushed by the students. For instance, asking the universities to not inviting them to the fair, to the work fairs, or defunding some of or actually like ending the programs. You know, we have these like part of the programs mean that the students in either part of their semesters, they go and actually work for a company, like ending those programs with those companies that we know that don't have a net zero target, are not on the race to zero, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I can stop there and continue with the conversation.
Thank you, Perla. You almost gave me the will to go back as a student again. So thank you so much. Now it's time for you to work, part of the audience. I didn't send you the concept note, but yeah, you have some work to do. So we really want to hear from you. as Jane said, I think all job is a climate job, and we are all in this together in the just transition. So maybe you can all share some examples and study cases that you know of or that you are part of. And if not, our panelists and speakers also have like some study cases, but we really want to try to do this moment of dialogue with you. And maybe we can share a micro for speakers to speak. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is there someone who wants? Yeah, thank you.
I'm not Gen Z, but I hope I'm allowed to say something. My name is Cristina Alonso, and I used to be to work for a big corporation for 26 years in Germany, in Bayer, the chemical pharmaceutical company. And at the end of last year, I decided to step down and give forward. So look into areas where I could be impacting and joining the Gen Z generation, actually, because I think we screwed it up. So I think we have to give everything so that the next generation does better. And one of the things I have taken over is a role as director for a center of research for the Jesuit universities in Spain, which is a consortium of universities altogether with 55,000 students. Now I just started last month, so brand new. I'll be really interested in talking to you, Perla, on your experience. But I think I relate to everything that has been said. It worries what you say on being disinvited to tables. My experience is how do we not make sustainability an extra topic and climate an extra topic, but how do we ingrain it so that also people who go in these industries that need to be reconverted will have a role and will be able to accompany it, because that's where the most value is going to be generated, not in the ones who already know and are already on the work. No? So it's not so much of a case study, but I mean, I'm happy to share any experience, but I relate to it, and we have to find ways that are pragmatic, that are not very big, but that they are moving things forward day by day, every day.
Thank you. Actually, I think it's a case of this transition because you just did your own transition, and it takes a lot of courage to do it. So, congratulations. Maybe some speaker want to answer or give some feedbacks on this question. Yeah, Robert.
I mean, I wanted to also, congratulate you first of all and wish you all the best and good luck in the new position. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. But I also wanted to share maybe a quick, if it's okay, unless somebody else from the audience wants to add anything. So I mean, just first of all, from IOE's side, we've obviously been engaged on this topic, and we try to collect examples from our members, right? So earlier this year, we published a series of case studies on the national level of green skills policy frameworks. We looked at 8 countries, mostly developing emerging economies like Nigeria and India and Pakistan and South Africa, where we've also interviewed our members there to see if they've been involved in any capacity in the development of green skills policies in their countries. We've also published a paper last year on just transition planning and activities from different member organizations as well as companies. So all of that is obviously on our website, and we try to promote it as well. But from the conversations I've been having, I think the circular economy, first of all, has a huge potential when it comes to strengthening green skills and providing a kind of demand and ecosystem for all of this, while serving climate objectives. And second of all, again, like I think sometimes you hear challenges and how solutions can come up when you look at specifics. I mean, one thing that I've heard from an Indian company that we work with called Mahindra Group, they're a huge conglomerate, but they work a lot on green skills. And one of the things that they were talking about was in the context of renewable energy projects, there's a geographic component where if you're doing industrial scale renewable energy, it's often, you know, outside of an urban environment, for example. So there's the whole question of not only skilled workers, but also how do you get those workers to where the project is. You have to think of the housing elements as well, and then also going back to the gender question, depending on, you know, local cultures, etc. For example, in this project in India, they found out that there is a challenge even if you have skilled women workers for renewable energy. You need to provide potentially some sort of support when it comes to childcare. You know, if you want women workers in that context to leave their home and go temporarily to a project site that's you know, outside of their city, you also have to provide some supportive measures in order to enable that. Otherwise, you might come up with a challenge there.
Thank you. Thank you for the cases. I know I'm seeing some of you wanted to add some words on that, but first of all, I wanted to say, to look if someone from the assistant wanted to share something more, trying to be mindful. No? Well, I think Matthias, you were first, and then Olga. So yeah, Matthias.
Thank you. So congratulations as well. That's fantastic. We see a lot of transitions in climate in the work that we do. I would bucket our work into micro-credentials. And this, I think, is a great pathway for people that don't want to return to an academic education. It provides a little bit more agility that is more perhaps in sync with the, I guess, trends of, especially around the space. Sorry. There we go. Thank you. There's a diagram over here. People can't see it. I'm just ignoring the picture here. It just says to hold it exactly like that. Sorry about that, team. Micro-credentials are a really fascinating way to almost, if this was a technology context, it's like an agile way of understanding what is needed, putting that into a course, and then iterating on that. So you have this really tight feedback loop, right? And I've been working on this model a little bit. And I think a lot of people that are looking to do a quick transition, especially if they don't have the ability to go back into academia, this is a fantastic way to really shift and transition people really, really quickly. However, it doesn't mean that the academia approach is broken. Actually, this is similar to what is happening in the standard space. I heard this analogy to explain standards. This is the reporting frameworks and ISO net zero sort of world. It actually also applies in this situation here. If we think about a conveyor belt, right, we have all these different forms of education that are available. Micro-credentials are able to capture the most innovative of ideas, put them into a small course in a much more bite-sized and more consumable way of doing things, right? And this allows us to have that really tight feedback loop, right? At the same time, we have the large, maybe shipping tanker. It sounds like you guys are very agile though, so I caveat that analogy. But if we think of academia as this large, at-scale education engine, we can really start to shift that tanker. It's going to take a little while, maybe 5, 10 years, for example, for it to really, really kick off. But this is, I think, where this feedback loop from this smaller micro-credential world and this larger but very powerful, scalable academic option, they can work really well together, right? And I think that's where bringing in the practitioner insights in academia, this is bringing in adjunct professors in to actually teach what is happening in industry. That's what we do with micro-credentials also, right? We want to make sure that we're trying to do our best to acutely change that sustainability skills gap that we see, right? But that ecosystem, that conveyor belt, does work together, right? And so the micro-credentials will continue picking up the most innovative things. Academia will start to ingest and build that into their programming. And finally, we have this future state where the scalable elements of our academic system are retooled for what we need to do for this skills revolution that we have. So hopefully that gives a bit of what I'm thinking about with your question here. But I think there's a lot of great examples of people getting into the climate space. I'll just give one final example from one of our courses. So we have someone who's now the CEO of the Hydrogen Council. She used to be a partner at FTI Consulting, which is usually a DC-based consulting firm. They're global as well. She's a very powerful executive, very impressive. She's now leading the efforts at the Hydrogen Council, which has been a spin-off of the World Economic Forum's hydrogen efforts. And I think it was Energy Day on the 15th. She's been involved with a coalition asking for these large endorsements to drive forward hydrogen in the private sector as well. And so you can see this mix of someone who has a fantastic background in a non-climate space, adding in the micro-credential, and then being able to target her skills in a really applicable way to drive forward climate action, which I think is a fantastic story. So anyway, that's I'll pause there.
Thank you for the detailed example. Maybe I'm asking again one question or one case you wanted to share. 1, 2, 3. If not, I will let Olga share.
Thank you so much, because then I will have to run to the next speaking engagement. So that's why I really wanted to share something with you. 2 things. One, I think it will all reflect, especially people who are here at the COP. Then from self-reflection, you can actually make quite a story. I joined the ILO back in 2008, so it's 16 years in the ILO, being a sociologist, economist, political scientist, and actually in my previous life, historian and social anthropologist. But I knew nothing about the environment, absolutely. And it just happened that when I came, it was the time when the ILO, together with UNEP, IOE, and ITUC, so International Workers and Employees Organizations, launched the first Green Jobs report. And it started actually the whole Green Jobs program. And this first report already identified that skills are a big issue. So first thing which I got on my desk was working on skills for green jobs. And that's how it started. And then we issued the first flagship report in 2019, the second flagship report, with plenty of examples, by the way. There are plenty, 145, if I recall correctly, case studies from around the world in the first report and in the second report. And we're actually now working on the new deep dive, so there will be a little update also. But in fact, even the projection which I mentioned today, if you look it up, the insights from a new projection on the ILO on the transition to renewable energy and digital transition, we actually looked at both. We looked at the interaction between the two. And of course, each transition brings disruption, right? So each transition brings some jobs and destroys some of them. It's a creative destruction of jobs. But in fact, if we implement in the integrated way the both policy scenarios, green and digital, then cumulatively they can actually generate net generates all positive 57 million by 2030. That's quite a lot, yeah. So that is something definitely to take into account. And then I have another example. I think, Robert, you heard that one. It's my favorite. It's a story of how I greened my plumber. It's a story how I greened my plumber. Do you hear me? Yeah. So I live in France. In France, there is a huge shortage of plumbers. All plumbers, green, non-green, no plumbers. So I have a plumber. I'm a lucky one. My plumber comes originally from Turkey. He's been living for many years in France. So I think has his qualification back from Turkey. But he learned a lot by doing, including in my house. And my house is ground heat pump based. So he had to learn that renewable energy solution with me for the last quite some years, 8 years or so. He's been learning that. So one day I even called him because I really needed him urgently. And he said, Olga, because you have this ground heat pump solution, I had to take a renewable energy course. I said, yes. So he did it, yeah. But now, with about the whole interaction between green and digital, my husband is a very big fond of all electronics. So we have the Internet of Things solution at home. So our heating and water heating system are linked to the mobile phone. And okay, so this is all Internet of Things. So what he does actually is linked to the TOT, Internet of Things. And there was another problem. So he needed to upgrade his skills. So there were quite some problems to install for the first time. So he has been learning. So this is just an example how a simple plumber, who actually may be simple, but in fact is extremely important for households and also for finding solutions for business buildings, offices, suggesting some alternative ways of installing, for example, some water-saving technology or energy-saving technology. So the plumber becomes actually very important. So it's a combination of very different skills. It's not only all green and pro-climate, but it's also soft skills, communication, and most of all, readiness to learn, this flexibility and openness to continue learning. I think this is the most important. Yeah, thank you. And by the way, we do have a definition of the just transition in our resolution.
Thank you, Olga.
Thank you.
It will be a pleasure to be at this event too. So I think we covered it all, from sectors with high emissions like green steel or steel sectors to smaller stakeholders like plumbers. And if you don't have any questions or any study cases to share, I just wanted to ask to each speaker to just share in 1 minute, one real minute, not a speaker negotiator minute, because we just have 7 minutes left for this event. So in 1 minute to share how can we, in our own work space, where we have a company, we are self-employed, doesn't matter, what can we do to accelerate this just transition? Hard question. Maybe Perla, do you want to start?
What can we do to accelerate a just transition?
Yeah.
I mean, what I will say, like from workforce of human capital that we are discussing in this panel, is raise the salaries of people who work in sustainability jobs. Because I don't know in your countries, but in my country, in Mexico, we're definitely not the we don't have as competitive salaries as working for polluting industries or polluting activities. So I always say that working for climate action is the most important work in the world, because saving the world deserves to be funded. So it's not to be regarded as a work that it's charity, because I don't know if any of you guys have some stories, but I do have stories of how, for instance, after winning a grant and looking for an incentive, like, you know, I won this grant that was to regenerate a river in the city, and it was a lot of money, and yes, I'm sorry. And then when I was like, where's my incentive? And the people from HR from where I used to work said, your incentive or your reward is getting the river, like saving the world. And I was like, yeah, but I also need to pay my bills, no? So, yeah, that will be it.
Thank you, Perla.
Show me the money.
We will show the money. Olga, maybe you want to show this money?
No, I think I also want to see the money. No, one word really, invest. But invest not just investing for anything. I think the key is investing and pacing the investment into climate jobs or green jobs, greening enterprises, greening the way we produce, we work, and pacing it in a way that we have people who are ready actually to take these jobs. And that is a combination of reskilling, upskilling, and preparing through initial training. So we need investments on both sides. This is the key. We cannot say, okay, let's just agree about the climate fund and that's it. We need to see what is the percentage of that fund that actually goes to social measures. That is the key. That's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olga. I know that you have to run, so yeah, feel free to run.
Thank you so much.
Then, Robert, do you want to follow?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, this is a whole other debate, but I think, if we look down to the individual action level and what we can do, I think, first of all, talk about it, talk to people around you. Like my colleague from Monterrey mentioned, some people don't even still think that, climate change is human caused. So I think it's important to talk and confront ideas, and also take some collective action, individual action that you can. So vote if you want, political action, engage with others who have similar motivation. And also send signals through the market with your money. We all spend money, we all buy things, right? So perhaps if you modify your choices a little bit, if you take the bike more often, if you, consume less energy, if you eat more vegan, these kinds of things, they send a market signal, I think, At the end of the day, maybe, unless we all do it at the same time, it won't make that big of a difference, but that's what we can do as individuals. Thanks.
Thank you. Perfect. Matthias, 1 minute.
I'll make mine fairly brief. So I'd like to just reaffirm that bringing in the just transition as well as skills and connecting that within our policy, the NDCs, is an incredible trifecta of activities that will drive that just transition and create better communities, better societies, and help us with getting to our goals as well. So I'll keep it brief. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Jane, I will let you do the final call to action.
I actually want to end with an example rather than a call to action, but Environmental Defense Fund, which is my other hat, in addition to Race to Zero, has a really neat program that I think could really be scaled up called the Climate Core program. And essentially, Environmental Defense Fund, as a big NGO, partners with businesses to have trained fellows, whether that's new graduates or those making transitions later on in their career. They place them at companies to do climate work for an amount of time while giving them skills. One of the things that I think is really neat about the just transition angle is we've been talking a lot about upskilling, but not so much the types of skills we want to look for and what we see as like the most important skills moving into the future. And one of the things that the fellows are evaluated against is not just what they have on their resume, but they are evaluated on their lived experience. So I think that that's a way of bringing in the just transition. They also have just transition focus specific fellows who are really bringing that environmental climate justice lens to the corporate world and trying to figure out what that looks like because it's complicated. So yeah, just want to end with a really neat program that I think we could all be learning from.
Thank you for ending with this very nice study case and example. Thank you all for joining. Let's keep in touch. Let's do the just transition together. Thank you. Have a nice day.